She almost drove past him again. That was the thing she would never fully admit. Not to her assistant, not to her mother, not even to herself in those quiet minutes before sleep. She had driven past him 14 times. She had counted, the way people count things they're trying to justify. The man was always in the same spot, beneath the narrow overhang of the old Caldwell Feed and Hardware building on Route 9, just past the Sunoco station, his back against the brick, a gray canvas tarp pulled to his chin like something that used to be a dignity. On the 15th night, it was raining in a way that felt personal. The kind of rain that doesn't fall, it arrives. And something in Margaret Hale's chest shifted, just slightly, the way a door shifts when someone on the other side turns a handle slowly. She pulled over. She sat in her idling car for 43 seconds. She watched the man pull the tarp tighter without opening his eyes, as if he had learned to protect himself from the weather while still asleep. As if waking up had stopped being worth it. And what she chose to do in the next 5 minutes was not dramatic. It was not loud, but it told Margaret everything about who she was, and something worse about who she had become. Stay with me. What happens next will make you question everything you think you know about human dignity, and what we owe each other when no one else is watching. Harmon Falls, Ohio sits in the crease between two counties that neither one claims too proudly. Population 4,100, give or take whoever left since the last census and whoever came back after the plant closures. The town has a single stoplight, a good hardware store, a diner called Patsy's that serves breakfast until 2 in the afternoon and closes at 3, and a stretch of Route 9 that the locals call the Long Mile, not because of its length, but because of what it used to hold. A cannery, a feed mill, a textile warehouse, and the Caldwell building, which has been empty since 2009 and slowly becoming something else entirely in the way that abandoned things sometimes do when no one is watching closely enough to stop them. Margaret Hale was 51 years old. She was the executive director of Harmon Falls Community Development Trust, which meant she decided which buildings got saved and which ones got quietly erased, which neighborhoods got investment, and which got a plaque and a sorry. She was precise and competent and had a habit of arriving 12 minutes early to every meeting. Not because she was anxious, but because she liked to be in a room before it became what other people needed it to be. She wore the same style of boot in 3 different colors. She kept a legal pad in her car and one on her kitchen counter and crossed off items with a single diagonal line, never a full scratch through. She had been hurt twice in ways that reorganized her. The first time was a man named David, who she met at 32 and loved with the kind of certainty that comes before you understand what love costs. He was charming and restless and spent 3 years making her feel like she was the most important room in a house he was always leaving. When he left for good, he said she was too independent. She had replayed that sentence for a year before understanding it was not a complaint about her. It was an explanation of him. The second time was a woman named Carol. Not a romantic love, but something just as rupturing. A business partner and a best friend of 11 years who slowly, quietly, over the course of 2 fiscal quarters, redirected grant funds into a separate account and called it a clerical error. Margaret had trusted Carol with her passwords and her car and the spare key to her mother's house. The investigation was discreet. The loss was not. After Carol, Margaret reorganized herself with the calm efficiency of someone who had decided that trust was a resource to be managed, not given. She was not bitter. Bitterness would have required her to believe something better had been stolen. She had simply adjusted her expectations to match her experience. It felt, most days, like wisdom. It only felt like loneliness late at night, and she had learned to be asleep before late became too late. James Collier was 44 years old, and he had been sleeping outside for 19 months. Before that, he had rented a room above Benny Marsh's garage on Clover Street for 6 years, paid on time, kept the space cleaner than the rest of the house. He had worked at Deacon's Auto on Fairfield Road as a mechanic, the kind who could listen to an engine the way a doctor listens to a chest, diagnosing by sound before a single panel was removed. He was known for this. He was also known for being quiet in the way that people confuse with simplicity, because he did not fill silence with noise, and some people have never learned to distinguish between those two things. He lost the job when Deacon sold to a regional chain and the new owners brought their own crew from Cincinnati. He lost the room 2 months later when Benny's daughter needed it for her son. He had no family left in Harmon Falls. His mother had passed in 2019. His brother lived in Phoenix, and they spoke on birthdays, sometimes. He had savings that lasted 3 months, then they didn't. He had a library card, which he used at the Harmon Falls Public Library every day it was open. He had a waterproof bag that held 3 things: a photograph of his mother in her garden, a notebook he wrote in most mornings, and a copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden with a broken spine and handwritten notes in the margins that no librarian would have approved of. Every day, without fail, if he had $2, he tipped the counter girl at Patsy's the full $2. When he had nothing, he still held the door. He carried the invisible weight of a man the town had stopped seeing. People stepped around him the way they stepped around a crack in the sidewalk, not with malice, just with the muscle memory of not looking down. He had learned to make himself smaller in the spaces he occupied. Not out of shame exactly, out of the practiced self-erasure of someone who has been told, without words, repeatedly, that his presence is a problem someone else might have to solve. He had never once asked anyone for anything. This was not pride. It was something quieter than pride. It was the last form of dignity available to him, and he held it the way you hold something that cannot be replaced. The night Margaret pulled over, she had a cup of coffee from the gas station, the kind in a styrofoam cup that stays hot past all reason, and a sleeve of crackers she had bought but not eaten. She knocked on the window of her own car for a moment before realizing she was outside it already. She walked to the overhang. She did not know what she was going to say. He opened his eyes when her footsteps hit the wet gravel, not startled, but alert, the way someone becomes alert when they have had to be. He looked at her. She held out the coffee and the crackers. He looked at those. "It's not a trick," she said, which was a strange thing to say, and she knew it immediately. "I didn't think it was," he said. He took the coffee. He did not take the crackers. "Thank you." She stood there for a moment in the rain. She could have left. She almost left. "The overhang only covers about 3 feet, she said. 4, he said. "Measured it." She almost smiled. "You measured it." Seemed useful to know. She looked at the building behind him. The old Caldwell building with its faded paint and its bricked-up windows and the ghost of a sign above the door that still said feed in letters that were losing their grip. She had a file on that building in her office. She had been deciding its fate for 11 months. "I know this building," she said. "Most people do," he said. "They just don't come here anymore." She drove home thinking about that sentence for 40 minutes. She came back the next night. She told herself it was because she was passing by anyway, which was partially true if you counted a half-mile detour as passing by. She brought a better cup of coffee from Patsy's, closed, but with the overnight pot still going. She didn't have a reason she could explain. He was reading by the light from his phone. He looked up, saw her, and did not seem surprised. He shifted slightly to one side of the 4 feet of dry ground. She sat down next to him on the concrete. This was not something she had planned to do. They talked for 40 minutes about the feed mill, about what the building had been, what it had meant to the county's economy, what it cost to heat a space that size. He knew things about industrial construction she didn't. He asked her questions about the trust that were precise and knowledgeable, not in the way of someone trying to impress her, but in the way of someone who had been paying attention to a town that had stopped paying attention to him. He talked about buildings the way she had always believed they should be talked about, not as assets, but as memories that happened to have load-bearing walls. She came back a 3rd time, a 4th. She brought coffee and sometimes food from the diner, and they sat in the 4 feet of dry ground, or in her car when it rained hard, and they talked about Harmon Falls and what it had been and what it might become if someone made different decisions than the ones that had been made. He never once asked about her life outside of the work. He never flattered her. He asked her once what she thought the Caldwell building wanted to be, not what she planned to do with it. And she found herself answering honestly in a way she hadn't answered anyone in years. He treated her like a person who had interesting ideas, not like a woman with authority, not like a resource, like a person. She drove home one night and sat in her driveway for a long time before going inside. The question that had started forming in the back of her mind finally came forward and sat down in front of her. How do I know? Not who he was. She thought she already knew that, in the way you know a piece of music after hearing it only once. Not perfectly, but essentially. How do I know if what I'm reading is real? Because she had been wrong before. She had been completely, catastrophically wrong before, and the thing about being wrong at that depth was that it didn't just take the thing you trusted. It took your confidence in your own judgment. It took the part of you that knew how to tell. She did not sleep well for 3 nights. She knew what she was going to do before she admitted it to herself. There was a property the trust held on the eastern edge of Harmon Falls, a former farmhouse on 12 acres that had come to them through a complicated estate arrangement in 2018. The main house was intact but neglected. There was a small barn and a root cellar and a stone wall that ran the length of the property, built section by section over 4 decades by the family who had lived there. Margaret had never put the property on any development plan. She told herself it was because the title was complicated. The real reason was that she had been trying to figure out what it deserved. She had never taken anyone there. Not a colleague, not a contractor, not her mother. It was the one place she had kept entirely her own. And she was going to take James Collier there and watch what happened and feel terrible about watching and do it anyway. She asked him if he wanted to see a property the trust was considering for restoration. She said it had an interesting structural history. Both of these things were true. She did not say the rest. It was a Thursday in early November. The sky was the color of old pewter, and the cold had that specific Ohio quality of arriving through your clothes rather than touching the outside of them. They drove east on Route 9 and turned on Ellsworth Road, and she didn't say much, and he didn't fill the silence with noise. They passed a field where a single horse stood at the fence line watching them with the calm disinterest of something that has seen enough seasons to not be curious about cars. He watched the countryside the way people watch things they find worth watching. The lane to the farmhouse was unpaved and rutted from the last rain. She parked at the edge of the property. They walked in through the gap in the stone wall where the gate had once been. The wall itself was remarkable, not uniform, not architectural in any design sense, but the accumulated work of someone's whole life, stone fitted to stone without mortar in some places, with careful precision in others, evolving across decades as the hand that built it learned its own craft. He stopped at the wall and ran his hand along the top of it slowly. He did not say anything. He kept walking. The farmhouse had a covered porch that had lost 2 of its posts, but still held its roof. The front door was unlocked. The trust had the only key, and she'd never bothered with the lock. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and a sweetness she couldn't name, something that might have been dried flowers or decades of particular cooking. The furniture had been left behind, covered with sheets that had turned the color of the walls. A kitchen table, a rocking chair, a sideboard with a cracked mirror that still caught the gray window light and held it. James walked through the house slowly. He touched nothing. He looked at the family photographs still hanging on the walls, 4 generations of the same family, the faces cycling through decades. He stood in front of one photograph for a long moment. A woman in a garden, middle-aged, kneeling beside a row of something she'd just planted, looking at the camera not with a posed smile, but with the expression of someone surprised into happiness. He moved into the kitchen. There was a jar on the windowsill, glass, old, with a rusted lid, and inside it, folded carefully, what appeared to be a small piece of paper. A note, perhaps. A recipe. Something someone had meant to come back for. He looked at it. She watched him from the doorway. He looked at it for a long moment. He could have opened it. He could have picked it up. He could have asked about it. The jar was small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, and the house had been empty for 6 years, and no one would have known or cared. His hand came up slowly and rested, flat-palmed, on the windowsill beside the jar. Not on it, beside it, as if he were steadying himself or acknowledging something. Then he stepped back. One step. Quiet. He turned and walked back toward the doorway where she was standing, and his face was not performing anything. He simply looked at the house around him with the expression of someone who understands what a place has held and does not want to diminish it. Somebody loved this, he said. Not to her. Just said it. Margaret felt something shift in her chest in the specific location where she had kept her best judgment for safekeeping. It moved without noise, the way things move when they have been in one position so long that the shifting itself is its own kind of answer. She could not have named it. Not yet. But she knew she had seen something real. They sat on the steps of the covered porch afterward. The 2 remaining posts held. The sky had gone from pewter to a darker gray, and the cold was settling in seriously now, the kind that makes people honest. He looked at the stone wall across the yard. "You've been here before," he said. Not a question. She waited a moment. "Yes. More than once. Many times." He nodded slowly, watching the wall. "My father built the last section of that wall," she said. "He bought the property from the Caldwell family. Before the feed business, there was a farm, and he used to come out here on weekends. He never did anything with the land. He just came out here and walked the perimeter and worked on the wall." She paused. "He died before I understood why. I've been trying to figure it out ever since." James looked at the wall. He looked at the 12 acres going back behind the house in their November gray. He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said, "he just needed somewhere that was only his." The words settled. She didn't speak for a long time. "Before we go any further, stop for a moment and answer this honestly. Have you ever pushed something good away because fear arrived before you could think clearly? Have you ever let the memory of a wound decide the fate of something that had nothing to do with that wound? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Now let's keep going." It was her assistant who called. Diane, who was thorough and loyal and had been with the trust for 9 years, said the words with the careful neutrality of someone reporting a fact they found troubling. "Someone pulled the title records on the Ellsworth Road property last week. A records request through the county assessor's office. The name on the request was James Collier." Margaret was in her car. She did not move for a moment. "When?" she said. "Wednesday. The day before you took him out there." She drove home. She did not call him. She did not go to the Caldwell overhang that night or the next. She turned her phone face down on her kitchen counter and heated soup she didn't eat and sat at her table in the specific silence of someone who has decided they already know the answer. She had been here before. Not exactly here, but in the geography of it. The moment when evidence arrives and confirms the thing you were already afraid of, and the relief and the devastation come simultaneously because at least now you know. At least now you can stop hoping. He sent a message on Friday. "I haven't seen you this week. I hope you're all right." She read it and did not reply. He sent one on Sunday. "The overhang flooded a little last night. Found a better spot near the library. In case you come by." She put her phone in her bag. She ate alone 4 nights in a row. She reviewed the Caldwell building file and made notations with her diagonal line and felt the competent efficiency of a woman who had simplified her life back down to things she could control. On Tuesday morning, there was something on the trust's front step. A rolled piece of paper, rubber-banded, with her name written on the outside in handwriting that was careful and a little formal. She brought it inside. She set it on her desk. She made coffee before she opened it. It was a drawing, hand-drawn on graph paper with a mechanical pencil, the lines clean and measured and precise. It was the Ellsworth Road property, not a blueprint, not a development proposal. It was a drawing of the farm as it might be restored, but not redesigned. The house remained. The stone wall remained. The barn remained. Along the south-facing field, drawn in careful rows, was a community garden, marked with small labels, plots for lease, low-income priority, each plot numbered. Along the lane from the road, a line of native trees labeled by name. Bur oak, shagbark hickory, eastern redbud. At the top of the drawing, in that careful handwriting, a title. What your father's wall could become if someone finished what he started. And at the bottom, a note. I pulled the title records because I didn't know if the property was in trust or private before I started drawing this. I didn't want to put anything on paper that assumed. I should have told you I was doing it. I'm sorry I didn't. Margaret sat at her desk for a long time. She thought about Carol, about how the evidence against Carol had arrived and fit so perfectly into the space she'd already cleared for it. How she'd been right about Carol, and how that rightness had become a lens she'd been looking through ever since. The way you keep seeing a face everywhere after someone you loved has worn it. She thought about a man who tipped $2 when he had $2 and held the door when he had nothing. She thought about a hand resting flat beside a jar it hadn't opened. The shame of the misread arrived quietly, the way real shame does. Not with noise, just with the slow certainty of someone realizing that the thing they were protecting themselves from was something they had already done. She did not call ahead. She found him at the library, in the reading room on the second floor, at the table by the window. He had his notebook open and his copy of East of Eden beside it. And he looked up when she came in, and his face did the thing that faces do when someone unexpected arrives, and you have to decide in half a second whether to be guarded or open. He waited. She sat across from him. I saw the drawing, she said. He nodded. I figured. I thought. When Diane told me about the records request, I thought you had pulled the title to look for vulnerabilities, to find out what the property was worth and who controlled it. I thought it was the same as before. Someone I trusted who had been counting things I didn't know they were counting. She made herself finish it. I pulled away without giving you the chance to explain. He was quiet. He looked out the window for a moment at the November street below. I know, he said. I could see it on your face that week, even from a distance. The silence has a particular quality when someone's made up their mind about you. He said it without anger, with the particular exhaustion of someone who had felt that quality of silence many times and knew its exact weight. You want to know what the hardest part is? It's not being suspected. I understand being suspected. The hardest part is having to be innocent on someone else's schedule, having to prove it in someone else's time, having to wait for someone to decide to believe you after you've already been tried. He looked back at her. I'm not angry with you, but I need you to know that it costs something. Every time, even when it resolves, it takes something from you that you don't fully get back. She held his gaze. She did not look away. You're right. I became the thing I was afraid of. I used the evidence of other people's choices to judge you without giving you the chance to tell me what you'd actually done. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not leaving, he said, but I need you to tell me, going forward, when you're afraid. Don't go quiet. Fear I can work with. Silence I can't find my way through. She nodded. It was not a performance. It was the kind of nod that is its own form of contract. Her mother, Eleanor Hale, was 77 years old and had raised 3 daughters and buried a husband and run the Harmon Falls Garden Society for 22 years and had opinions the way other people had furniture, arranged specifically and not moved easily. She set a Sunday table. Good dishes. The kind that came out for occasions she had already decided were occasions before the guests arrived. She asked Margaret nothing about James before he came, which meant she had already decided to ask him everything directly. He arrived 11 minutes early. He brought a jar of black raspberry jam from the Becker farm stand on Route 40, which had been selling the same jam from the same recipe since 1974, and Eleanor Hale looked at that jar the way she looked at things that surprised her, briefly, carefully, with her face going neutral. They ate. Eleanor asked about his work history. He told her plainly. She asked about his family. He told her about his mother and the garden and the photograph he carried. She asked about the Ellsworth Road drawings. He explained how he'd done the research, what he'd looked at, what he'd thought the land could hold. Then she set her fork down. What do you want from my daughter? Not unkind, just direct. He did not rush to answer. He looked at Eleanor Hale the way he looked at things worth looking at. To be present, he said. That's all. To show up honestly and consistently and see what that becomes. Eleanor picked her fork back up. She did not praise him. She did not make any observable expression of approval. She returned to her pot roast and asked Margaret about the Caldwell building renovation timeline. And the conversation moved on the way family conversations move, when the important thing has already happened and everyone has agreed, wordlessly, to let it settle. Later, while James helped clear the table, Eleanor came to stand beside Margaret at the kitchen window. "People who are after something blink," she said quietly. "They look for your reaction before they finish their sentence. They manage you." She watched him through the doorway, moving carefully in her kitchen, stacking dishes without clattering them. "This one doesn't blink." She patted Margaret's arm once and went to make coffee. It was a Sunday in February, the specific gray of February that feels like the world has been paused between two decisions. They were in his new room, a small apartment above the print shop on Caldwell Street, arranged through the Trust's transitional housing program. Margaret had done something she'd never done before and used her position to make sure an application moved at the speed of rightness rather than the speed of paperwork. She told him all of it. The original plan, the test, what she had been looking for at the farmhouse, and what she told herself she was doing while she watched him move through those rooms. He listened. He let her finish. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You knew?" "I knew by the second room," he said. "The way you stayed in the doorway. The way you were very still." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I've been watched my whole life. I know what observation feels like. I know the difference between someone looking at the same room you're in and someone looking at you inside the room." "And you stayed," she said. "I stayed because the test didn't bother me. What would have bothered me, what would have been the actual wound, was if you'd never told me. If you'd made your decision and kept it private, and I'd never known what that afternoon was. That would have meant I didn't matter enough to be honest with." She was quiet. "I'm telling you," she said. "I know," he said, and something in his face did what faces do when a tension they have been holding for a long time finally releases. Not a smile, exactly. Something quieter than a smile. "That's why we're still here. Trust," she thought, looking at him in the February gray, "is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to be honest about the fear anyway. It is showing someone the place where you are most likely to fail them and letting them decide to stay." They started work on the Ellsworth Road property in March. Weekends, mostly. Sometimes a weekday, if Margaret could move her afternoon. They cleared the porch first, replaced the two missing posts with timber salvage from the barn's collapsed side section. They repointed the chimney. They stripped 30 years of paint from the kitchen floor and found oak underneath the color of honey and firelight. James repaired the stone wall section by section, learning the logic of how the previous hands had fitted stone to stone, matching not just shape but intention. The community garden beds went in during April, 12 plots, each one framed with cedar, reserved by application for residents who had been in Harmon Falls the longest and had the least. The waiting list filled in 11 days. One morning in early May, Margaret drove out before he arrived. She walked around the side of the house, toward the garden, and stopped. Along the inside of the stone wall, running its full length, someone had planted bleeding hearts. Dozens of them, low and arching, their pink and white flowers hanging like small lanterns in the morning light, following the wall her father had built, growing from the ground between the garden and the thing that had made it possible. She stood at the end of that wall for a long time. She was still standing there when he arrived. She didn't turn around. "When did you do this?" she said. "Last weekend," he said, "when you went to see your mother." She turned around. The light was coming in from the east, the particular light of early May that is the most generous light the year offers. And she looked at him standing at the gap in the wall with his hands in his pockets and the whole restored farm behind him. And she said, "I love you." He didn't move for a moment. Then he said, "I know. I love you too." No ceremony, no performance, just truth placed beside truth, the way stones are placed beside stones when someone is building something meant to last. 6 months later, October. The bleeding hearts had gone dormant. The garden plots had been harvested and turned over. The oak floors glowed. He had asked Eleanor's permission on a Tuesday in September, arriving at her door without calling ahead, which Eleanor respected as a form of seriousness. Eleanor had asked him one question. Why her? He had answered without pausing. Because she sees things as they are and loves them anyway. I've been waiting to meet someone like that my whole life. Eleanor had poured him coffee, and they had talked for 2 hours about the Garden Society and Ohio's soil composition, and she had hugged him when he left, which she had not done since Margaret's father died. On an October afternoon at the Ellsworth Road farm, standing at the Bleeding Heart wall, he took from his jacket pocket a ring that had been his mother's, a simple gold band with a single small stone, blue as October's sky, worn smooth by 30 years on his mother's hand. His mother had kept a garden. His mother had been photographed in it with the expression of someone surprised into happiness. He had carried the ring in his waterproof bag for 2 years, next to the photograph, next to the notebook, next to Steinbeck. He said, "Not because of what you have, because of who you are when you think nobody is watching." Margaret looked at the ring. She thought about a November afternoon in a farmhouse, a jar on a windowsill, a hand resting flat beside it. She thought about what she had been looking for and what she had found, and how they were not the same thing, and how that was the best possible outcome. She held out her hand. They sat on the restored porch in the October afternoon with coffee in the good cups, the ones she'd brought from home, the ones that meant she intended to stay. He said, "This place saved us, I think. It gave us somewhere to be honest." She thought about it. She looked at the wall her father built and the garden beds ready for spring and the bleeding hearts that would come back in May without being asked. "The place didn't save us," she said. "It just gave us somewhere to look. We had to decide to look." She was right, and he knew it. Fear had arrived first, as it always does, wearing the disguise of wisdom, wearing the clothes of hard-won experience and reasonable caution. It had said, "I am protecting you." It had said, "You know how this ends." It had said, "He is the same as the others, and you already know how to survive that." And the love, the actual thing, had not shouted back at any of it. It had simply kept showing up, in a drawing on graph paper, in a hand that didn't reach for a jar, in a man who measured the 4 feet of shelter available to him and made peace with the number. Love does not demand proof. It does not negotiate with fear. It asks only this: can you keep showing up, honestly, in the small moments no one is filming? The afternoon light came through the bur oak at the lane's edge, the one James had planted in March, still young and thin, but holding its place in the ground with the patience of something that knows what it intends to become. A lamp burned in the farmhouse window behind them, visible now in the shortening October afternoon. The stone wall ran its full length in the low golden light. Everything was still. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. My wonderful friends, real love does not announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in 4 feet of dry concrete, in a hand that doesn't reach for what it could take, in a drawing left on a doorstep by someone who owed you nothing and chose to give you everything. What did you think of Margaret and James? Was Margaret right to test him, or was Margaret the one who needed to pass the real test all along? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to hear from you. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit like. Share this with someone who needs to believe that this kind of love still exists. That dignity survives what the world does to it. That being seen, truly seen, is worth the wait. A new story is coming very soon. You will not want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one.